Depersonalization is when you persistently or repeatedly have the feeling that you're observing yourself from outside your body, or you have the sense that things around you aren't real. This sounds a lot like what Bryan described in the Visual Snow forum. Hey y'all, welcome back to Ramblin' Mama. I'm Lisa. If you're new here and you like deep dives on true crime, please give me a subscribe. I think you'll like what you see. And head on over to my community tab. I've been posting a lot of polls in there recently. One of the polls was that I'm considering doing a series called Woo Woo Wednesdays, where I take a look at woo-woo stuff like near-death experiences. Just want to reiterate, this does not mean that I am going to stop covering true crime. So if you're only here for that, fear not. I'm still gonna be putting out my weekly videos, if not more often than that. So please don't get scared off. For today's video, I'm gonna do my first deep dive on Bryan Kohberger. I'm editing now and I realized that this wasn't very clear. So for the first part, I'm gonna go over some things that I wanted to point out about Bryan. The second part is gonna be his, I guess you could say, friends and acquaintances. And in the third part, we're gonna look at some expert opinions. Just a reminder that I am not an expert. This is just based on my own research. Please feel free to do your own research and form your own opinion. And please remember to be kind to each other in the comments below. So I'm sure by now you all know the following things about Bryan Kohberger. He was a 28-year-old criminology student who is getting his PhD from Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. He originally is from Pennsylvania, where he did his undergrad, and he majored in psychology. He's a vegan who previously had been overweight, and according to his aunt and uncle, he was very uptight about his veganism. They spoke about how he insisted on getting new pots and pans for his food to be cooked in so that it was cooked in, I guess, vegan-friendly pots and pans. He reportedly struggled with addiction for years, and he had a couple of stints in rehab. I've noticed a pattern in the way that people who've known him describe him, and tell me if y'all have seen this pattern too. What I've noticed about guys who've known him, their take on him seems to be he was the epitome of the normal dude. Laughed at how much this guy just kept on harping on how normal. And I think it's because these people are trying to wrap their heads around how someone so normal, someone that they trusted, who they were around a lot, could do something as atrocious as this. But then when it comes to the females that he knew, I've been hard pressed to find one female that doesn't allude to the fact that he was creepy somehow. I wonder if these girls were picking up on something instinctively in their gut that made them not feel safe. And if that threat didn't exist as much with the guys, or if they weren't as in tuned and able to pick up on it. But let me know what you think. Something else that I want to talk about that I feel like has been a little glossed over with Bryan, but again, feel free to disagree with me if you've seen it covered a lot, is his condition of visual snow. I know that people tend to talk a lot about the incel theory, and I think that is super valid, which is why I include a lot of that in the second part. But I don't think people have covered this visual snow aspect as much. What visual snow is, it's actually a form of visual hallucination. People with visual snow syndrome see the world through a constant overlay of flickering dots passing over their entire field of vision. But it can also be partial too, and is present in all conditions of illumination, meaning even when people who have this condition close their eyes, they continue to see visual snow. The incurable condition is not due to eye problems. It's caused by a brain malfunction. They found higher rates of anxiety, depression, depersonalization, fatigue, poor sleep. Additionally, psychiatric symptoms, particularly depersonalization. What depersonalization is, when you persistently or repeatedly have the feeling that you're observing yourself from outside your body, or you have the sense that things around you aren't real, or both. This sounds a lot like what Bryan described in the Visual Snow forum.
When he was a teenager, the man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students posted on a forum dedicated to a condition known as visual snow. He wrote in part, "I feel like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth. As I hug my family, I look into their faces, I see nothing. It is like I am looking at a video game, but less." Visual snow syndrome is a disorder where someone sees static. In more than 100 posts between 2009 and 2012, Kohberger reportedly wrote that visual snow led to anxiety, poor self-image, and, quote, crazy thoughts. These revelations come as Kohberger's public defender pours through discovery, preparing for a preliminary hearing this summer.
It just so happens that not that long ago, I was watching this TED Talk. And in it, I don't know if y'all have seen it already, I'll link it in the description below. It's really interesting. This doctor is advocating for, in addition to the usual protocol that we do with psychiatric patients, that we also start imaging their brains, because we've overlooked the physical aspect of these disorders. A really powerful example he gave was of, I believe it was his nephew, who actually had a cyst in, I believe it was his temporal lobe. And before this, he was doing very disturbing things, acting out and drawing pictures of his family hanging from a tree. The usual protocol would be to simply medicate him. And if that doesn't work, change the meds. And if that doesn't work, change it again. But instead, he scanned his nephew's brain and he located this cyst. And then when it was removed, it's like he was back to being a regular kid. I'm not saying in any way that this condition could be an excuse for homicide. I'd be interested to see if his defense uses it in any way. I think they might. Greg Hartley from the behavior panel, who I know y'all like as well based on that poll, he describes people like this, serial killers, psychopaths, etc., as broken toys. My gut, and again, not an expert, just a rambling mama, my totally uneducated, amateur, unfounded opinion is that there's something here about the visual snow and potential brain malfunctions and all of this stuff around addiction and veganism. It feels like he was desperately looking for a solution, either in total excess and indulgence with addiction, or in the complete opposite of control and restriction, like with a very restricted diet. What do y'all think about that? Do you think the visual snow is not really a big deal? Do you think that it could be a clue into Bryan potentially being a broken toy, like Greg Hartley would call it? What do you think? This first clip comes from a guy who knew Bryan from college. And this guy made me laugh because he seems to be actively trying to wrap his mind around how normal Bryan seemed and how could he possibly have done this. It just feels like cognitive dissonance, like the two things can't coexist with one another. His image of who this guy was and this act, he can't reconcile it.
What's going on? Josh Ferraro here. I went to college with Bryan Kohberger. I've been looking at his picture all day. I've been saying the name all day in my head. And I was like, I know this guy. I know this guy. And then he went to DeSales University. I'm like, I know I had a class with him. I know it. I know it. The name sounds so familiar. And he looks very familiar. But I couldn't put a point on it. And he lost so much weight. When I knew him, he was a pudgy guy. He was really friendly. He led my biology project at DeSales University. And he was a pretty smart guy. And he was interested in criminal justice. And I remember having classes with him. And for this guy to do that is beyond me. I mean, he was a really nice guy. And he does not look like that nice guy anymore. I mean, the guy that I'm seeing on the news looks like a cold-blooded killer. The guy that I went to college with, that dude was nice. He was a nice guy. We studied criminal justice together. He was a really nice guy. And I'm devastated and heartbroken that I knew this guy and that he did this. I'm devastated for those families. I never thought that it would be someone close to home from the Lehigh Valley at DeSales University. And here is the biology project. and from 2018. We were studying Daphnia. And how there he is, and he led this project. 11/16/18.
This is a clip that I think most people have seen. This woman got a lot of backlash for coming out like this, and people thought that she was just looking for clout. What I see is a woman who is very much in shock. It feels like she thinks if she can give some context or educate people. To me, I don't get the vibe that she's trying to get clout from this.
I don't have many followers, so I'm not sure who this is going to reach out to, but regarding the case of the 4 Idaho students that were slain and the arrest that was made, I used to be friends with Bryan Kohberger during my middle and high school years. And then before anyone comes at me and says that I'm just running for clout, I'm not. I have pictures that I will show you. I have screenshots that I will show you. I have yearbook pictures that I show you. I went to school with the kid. I was friends with him. I wouldn't make something like this up. I am just in absolute shock right now. I was heading to lunch when my mom called me, and immediately I knew something was off because I have the type of family that we don't call each other. So if someone does call someone, we know something's bad. She called me and asked me about the murders. I didn't know where she was going with it until she said that it was Bryan Kohberger, and naturally I freaked out and called about. I'm not trying to put any names out there. Like, I'm not trying to get like my friends involved, but it's crazy when you sit there and you realize that the person that was in your parents' home, in your friend's home, you were in their car, you were in his house. I knew his mom. She was a substitute teacher at Pleasant Valley. It's crazy to think that, I don't know. Again, he obviously no longer has a Facebook, but they still allow you to filter old messages. Here's something. I invited him to a party back in 2014. He seemed fine. It's crazy just what can switch in someone's brain. Again, after the whole incident, I didn't know that he was literally making me drive to get him here until Brendan told me. So I messaged him a pretty rotten message just because I was pissed. I didn't know there was in my car. But this was, again, 2013. I was 2 years, graduated from high school. He then said he was in rehab. He would randomly message me after that. This is him mentioning he wanted to study criminal justice. Again, back in 2013, he was already hoping to do that, and then that obviously fell through because he said he went to rehab. But apparently he went back at it, and again, in 2017, that's when it seemed like everything was fine and he was doing great for himself. So it was kind of crazy that this happened. But yeah, this is also talking about, hanging out with Bryan, chilling with them, and then Brandon said they're like not friends anymore, and this happened a lot because of what he was doing, his addiction, and he had some anger issues. I know he did kickboxing to kind of help with that, but wish I had more pictures. I'm sure I have plenty from MySpace days, but for some reason I cannot get onto my MySpace. When I click to search, it just gives me like broken photos, and I'm sure I had more pictures with him because, again, I did a lot with him. We hiked a mountain by my parents' house together. He mentioned that in one of the messages I had with him. Again, I'm so sorry if this is really fast. I don't really know what to say.
This next interview is someone who worked with Bryan.
Personally, Rich Pasqua, you worked with him for a period of time. Rich, what can you tell me about the suspect? What was he like?
He was just your average guy. I met him through some friends, and they told me that he was a little weird, and he was a little socially awkward, I guess you could say. But he wasn't a bad guy. He needed a job, so I worked at a pizza shop at that time, and they were hiring. I said, yeah, come on in and apply, and he did, and he got the job. So I worked with him for a little bit. But he was quiet, though.
What
he
was
didn't ever come off
conversation like with him?
What was that?
What was conversation like with him? Like when you talk with him at work, would he look you in your eyes? Did he have friends? Did he have a girlfriend at the time?
It was so long ago. It was like 2013, but he didn't have a girlfriend. I do remember that. And my wife went to school with him. They graduated together, and she doesn't remember him ever having a girlfriend, and I don't remember him ever having a girlfriend. And he didn't have many friends, so he like would do anything to fit in, and would do like, he just wanted to be liked by everybody. But he wasn't a bad kid. Like, he was all right. And I knew his sister. I went to school with his sister, and I knew his father worked for the school, and I believe his mother did too. But his family, they were all nice people, and his dad was always really nice to me, very polite. But I never thought that he would do something like that.
Good copy. So we've heard from some people that surrounded him that there may have been drug use in his life prior as well. Did you know him to use drugs or anything like that, sir?
Yeah, he did use drugs. That's how I really know him too. He was a big heroin addict, and so was I. I got 6 years clean now. I work in treatment and everything, but back then I was using, and so that's how I know for a fact he was using. I've got high with him a couple times and used with him, and I remember one night we went out and his car broke down, and his dad had to come out, and he got pretty angry because his car broke down and everything, and we couldn't get what we needed that night. And I knew other people that dealt drugs, and we would deliver drugs to him a lot. And so that's when I heard about this case. I haven't heard from him in so long. And then I heard about this, and it said that he was going to college. I said, I haven't heard from him. I guess that's what he's been doing. He must have cleaned up. I know he was in and out of rehab a couple times, but he really did. He cleaned up and was going to college all these years.
Rich, I'm short on time, but I got to ask you one last question. We've heard from people that he had a track record of being inappropriate, borderline offensive to women. Did you ever see that in any of your interactions with him and interactions with women?
Not in my time knowing him. I've never seen him ever act like that towards women. I've never seen him come off that way ever towards anybody.
There was a girl who had a really, really awkward Tinder date with Bryan.
Nurse Haley Willett says they met on Tinder in 2015 when they were both psych majors at Pennsylvania colleges. He took her to a movie, then insisted on escorting her to her dorm room.
I was kind of afraid to say no, so I just let him come in with me.
Then he did something she says she'll never forget.
He kept trying to tickle me, and I would ask him to stop, or I'd say, "What are you doing?" And he would be like, I'm not tickling you. And he would get very serious.
Creeped out by Kohberger, she came up with a clever ruse.
I proceeded to pretend to throw up in the bathroom, hoping that, it would gross him out and he would leave.
Did it work?
Yeah. He had messaged me on Tinder and said that he was leaving and that he had a good time and that he would message me later. And then about an hour later, he messaged me and he said that I had good birthing hips, and I just never messaged him back after that.
To me, this just feels like someone who has no knowledge relating to the opposite sex, like someone who finds himself in a foreign land and doesn't speak the language. If you took that poll, sorry, I have to keep mentioning it. You love you all some Dr. Grande, and so do I. So we're gonna see some of his opinion on Bryan's motivations.
There is this theory that Bryan was planning the perfect murder. This is supported by him being a PhD criminology student who was described as exceptionally intelligent. I think the probable cause affidavit removes any doubt about this theory. If Bryan is the killer, his motive was based on obsession, revenge, and/or sexual domination, not because he was trying to plan the perfect murder. One amazing aspect of this case is that Bryan was seemingly so functional, yet capable of allegedly committing a crime like this. He stood out as socially awkward, bizarre, and strange, but nobody thought he was homicidal. He didn't have a great disguise, but he had a good disguise. Item number 2, if Bryan is guilty, it amazes me that a highly intelligent PhD student who studied criminology would make so many mistakes. He left his DNA on an item that can be tied directly to the crime. It wasn't like it was on something innocuous, where there may have been a non-homicidal explanation for how it could have ended up there, like some type of consumer good that he touched in a store, and then one of the residents bought it and brought it back in the house. It was on something that the killer would have touched. Bryan left his phone on when he visited the King Road house multiple times in the months leading up to the murders. He didn't realize how suspicious it looked that he turned his phone off during the murders. He used his own vehicle to drive to and from the residence of the victims, and he left a witness alive.
I think it's really interesting how he points out, for being a really intelligent guy, Bryan was a little sloppy. Do you think this is because the perfect crime or murder is so hard to commit in the age of digital footprints and DNA? Or do you think it's intentional that he made some of the errors that he made? What do you think about Dr. Grande's opinion about dominance, obsession, and possibly revenge? You know, Dr. Grande, he can distill it all so eloquently in a very short format. But what do you think about that? Do you agree? Now, this next expert, Dr. Carol Lieberman, I'd never heard of before, but I thought she was so spot on. So you'll have to forgive me. This next clip is very long. Trust me, I edited it as much as I could, but to me, these were such interesting takes that I had to include them here.
Joining the program now is Dr. Carol Limberman, a forensic psychiatrist, a trial expert witness, and she's also a body language expert.
Well, that actually is him walking in the halls of the court after he had spoken to the judge. And, he has this deadpan look. Most of the pictures and video that we see of him he has this deadpan look, and his people who knew him or even his current classmates said he has this, that's how he is. In this picture, that's when he's walking to the courthouse, and you see that he looks for a second at the reporters. They're calling to him and asking him, why did you do it, and so on. And but other than that, he then quickly looks straight ahead, turns toward the courthouse, and has this robot-like walk. And the only time that we have seen him other than this kind of robotic in these court pictures, though, you do see some indication of his anxiety. For example, his biting his lip, in walking in the hall. In the other picture, he was blinking some. Those are some indications of anxiety. But the main picture, video where he looks other than deadpan is the one where the second arrest, well, not really an arrest, but where the police stop him in Indiana, he and his father driving to Pennsylvania, and he looks at the policeman and he is panic-stricken. Yes, there we go. He's expecting maybe this is going to be it. This is going to be the arrest. And his father, in contrast, his father has this very strange affect. He tells the policeman about some crime that happened in Washington, not the 4 students who were murdered, and how his son is going to school in Washington. Very strange. I think we're beginning to see that a lot of strange things about his father. Like at the courthouse yesterday, he wore these strange clothes, not appropriate really for going to court where your son is being accused of murder.
It's interesting that you mentioned the father. Do you think that perhaps he had some knowledge about his son possibly committing these crimes?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. I think, the father is perhaps in denial, but it's so strange that he would fly to Washington right after the crimes and drive back across the states. Was this on the father's bucket list, that he wanted to go cross country? Did he hear something in his son's voice that sounded a bit off and he was worried about his son driving all the way? Or did he have some inkling about the son? He had to have heard about the white Elantra. He knows that his son has that car. He drove all the way in that car. Perhaps even when the policeman stopped him, that was the father's nervousness talking about all of these things that perhaps the father also was worried that the policeman was going to arrest his son. I've talked about how he's an incel. Besides whatever other psychiatric problems he has, I think the main motive for this was that he is an incel and involuntary celibate who was enraged at these 4 students for being Stacy's and Chad's, what incels call the beautiful people, the people who they think wouldn't give them the time of day. An incel is a man who has had a long history, really from the first time that they showed interest in a woman, or these are men who feel unfairly deprived of women wanting to have sex with them or wanting to date them. Because they've been rejected all along, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They build up rage as they get rejected more and more. And we don't know we do know, there are things that have come out that kind of support that characterization of him. The fact that his cell phone was found pinging in the same places as these 4 students were, especially Kaylee. When he was young, when he was in high school, and he was overweight and he was considered a nerd and so on. But more than that, the girls bullied him, high school girls bullied him, threw things at him. And it went from there. A bar in his neighborhood in Pennsylvania talk about how the owner of the bar had to talk with him because he was he was harassing the women, the staff, and the customers, trying to get them to, pay attention to him, to go out with him, and so on. So there's a history of that. There's a subculture on the internet of these incels. The most famous incel was Elliot Rodger in 2014. He's the one who shot and knifed and ran over with his car a bunch of students at UC Santa Barbara. And he's sort of the incel hero. Now, the incels have already, just recently, they have started a free Bryan Kohberger campaign. So they recognize him as one of them. They feed each other's rage, and they describe the crime scene as so not just knifing, stabbing, which is very personal, but the fact that it was so brutal. And that is because he unleashed on them, in my opinion, all of the rage, that he has been storing up in his 28 years. And, obviously he has some other psychological problems as well. But, and we of course, we haven't learned very much about his family. And, other than what we saw, we know one of his sisters is a psychologist. We know his father went bankrupt in 2010. I would say that probably the family member who influenced him most in a negative way was his father. I think it was 2 things. One, he was struggling with the demons inside of him, the murderous demons inside of him that wanted to commit a crime. He was struggling to try to damp those down, calm those. But on the other hand, at the same time, he was also trying to learn what he could about criminology and criminals and how to commit the perfect crime. I think that's what he was trying to do. He had these 2 impulses fighting with each other, and apparently the one where he wanted to commit the perfect crime won. And I think part of it, there's been talk about his teacher, who is a famous criminologist who's written a bunch of books and so on, and has collaborated with the BTK killer. And I think part of him, he wants to be his own book. He wants to have books about him. And I think he also fantasized about writing a book with this teacher about him and his crimes. In his studies of psychology and criminology, that is what Ted Bundy did. Ted Bundy studied psychology first, and then he studied not criminology per se, but he studied law. And he studied that in Washington. And so it made me wonder whether, in fact, Bryan Kohberger was following or trying to follow in Ted Bundy's footsteps and go to Washington to study criminology, in the same kind of way. The main difference, though, between the two of them is that Ted Bundy was not an incel. He was a charmer. You know, he had women. He could get women. He did get women. That's how he was able to kill a lot of the women, because they came with him. They were attracted to him. So, but you know, it is kind of, I wonder if it's just a coincidence that he went to Washington, or he really, especially since he was studying criminology, he knew about Ted Bundy, you know, so perhaps doing that on purpose.
So one of my subscribers mentioned that he really liked Pat Brown. So I went and looked her up. And what's really interesting to me about this clip is she did this video a few months ago, before a lot of this information had come out. So take a look and tell me what you think.
This was a female house. It wasn't a mixed, you know, weren't like three boys and 3 girls in this house. It was a female house. He was just there because he was staying over with his girlfriend. If he wasn't supposed to be there, then a mass murderer, serial killer type could say, hey, I'm going in there and get the girls. He could decide that, well, if I come in this part of the house, I'm going to get whatever girls are up here. You know, not worried about the ones down here where 2 more were, but hey, there's girls up here. I'll get whatever's up here. And he goes through and methodically kills them because he finds that thrilling, and then leaves. Is that possible? It's an avenue. It's an avenue. Because sometimes you get a person who will, you know, just really hone in on a particular group that he sees. I don't know how he got in. There supposedly is a, you know, one of these pads you have to click in the code. Now, was it actually initiated? Was the place locked up? That would be a good question. And I don't know the exact answer to that. The girls were drunk. So did they come in and not activate it? I don't know how their system worked, whether it was automatic or not. If there was a code needed to get in, then it would be unlikely that some guy watching the place would know the code. If it was left open, then the guy can get in. And here's something just to be aware of, that a guy who's watching, he could have watched night after night and saw the girls go in, and he could have checked the door one night and it didn't open. He was like, okay, it needs a code. I can't do that. He sees the girls leave the door open. This is the night he goes and strikes. Is this possible? Yeah, it's an avenue that they're going to have to investigate. Is there some crazy serial killer / mass murderer type of guy out there who just wants to be some creepy guy, you know, who's going to break in and go through the house and find the girls wherever they are, and then ran into Ethan and said, crap, there's a guy here, but what the heck, got to take him out too. And so he gets taken out. That's a possibility. For me, again, that's interesting. If he, you know, that he would go through the whole house and do this. But I don't see necessarily good proof of that this is how this guy would work. I'm also looking at the layout of the house. Let me throw the layout of the house here. Okay, so layout of the house is a little weird. So here's where you come in. This is that entrance to the kitchen. And in the downstairs area, there's supposedly this bedroom here, but that's not what the couple was. So you actually have to go up here, and I'm quoting from what I've heard. You have to go through the laundry room to enter the bedroom, which is kind of strange. You know, it's like, how would you even know there's a bedroom back here? I'm not even sure. And as far as going upstairs, it's weird because you can't see a staircase here, but I believe it's around the foyer area here. And so somehow you go up the stairs, and then you've got the choice of the 2 girls. So one of the questions would be, did somebody target the entire house, or did somebody target who's ever in the house? Here would be my theory on that. If the girl here, that would be Xana, was targeted, there would be no reason to go upstairs and kill the other 2. That just doesn't make sense to me. So let's say we'll go back to Stalker guy. He comes in here, he wants Xana. He goes there, oh my God, she's with her boyfriend. He has to kill both of them. Fine, he's all right with that. But at that point, he's also a little shook because he wasn't planning to run into boyfriend. And what you do then is you come right back out here and you go out the door. You run away. You do not have any reason to go up there and kill these girls at all. So that, I find it hard to believe these girls will be killed by somebody stalking Xana. Now, if the guy was stalking the two girls up here, that makes more sense. He could have come in. If he didn't know where they were, he's looking for them. And he runs into these and they kills them, but he still wants to kill these. So then he makes his way upstairs and finds them and kills them.
It reminded me of that clip that I put in the last video on the Idaho 4 from Kaylee's father, who kept saying he didn't have to go up the steps. And Pat Brown, before she even had this information, kept focusing on that. I was really impressed by that. What do you think about these theories? Who do you think this guy Bryan Kohberger is? Do you think his father had any knowledge, like Dr. Lieberman seems to hint at? Do you think that could help explain why he agreed to something as, I think, strange as driving cross country from Washington to Pennsylvania? That's a very long drive, particularly for someone who isn't terrified of planes or something like that. That's going to be it for me today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out, and I'll see y'all next time.